The Unseen Queen, A Beauty and the Beast, Retelling. When you spend your whole life being invisible, you learn that silence hurts less than rejection. That's how Mira's story begins. The day the royal messengers arrive at their estate is the day she discovers that sometimes being unseen is the cruelest fate of all. She'd been her family's hidden shame since birth. Not deformed, not disabled, just plain. Unremarkably, unforgettably plain in a world where beauty determined worth. Growing up, she'd watched her sisters receive suitors, gifts, and adoration while she remained tucked away in the background, a shadow no one bothered to acknowledge. Her mother would say it was for her own protection. But Mira knew the truth. They were ashamed. And when hope finally flickered that perhaps someone might see beyond her ordinary face, it was snuffed out so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it at all. Because the cruelest thing about being overlooked isn't the loneliness. It's realizing that even those who claim to love you would rather pretend you don't exist. Chapter 1. The grand hall of the Ashford estate gleamed with afternoon light, making the marble floors shine like glass. Mira sat in her usual corner behind a decorative screen, invisible as always, embroidering a handkerchief no one would ever notice. She could hear everything, though, her mother's tinkling laugh, her sister's animated chatter, and the deep voices of the 3 royal messengers who had arrived an hour ago. His Majesty King Cassian seeks a bride, the lead messenger announced, his voice carrying through the hall. Every noble family in the kingdom is invited to present their daughters at the palace next week. The king will choose his queen from among them. Mira's needle stilled. King Cassian, the most powerful ruler in the known world. A man so handsome that songs were written about his beauty, so wealthy that his treasury could buy entire kingdoms, so commanding that even the fiercest warriors knelt before him. "What an honour!" her mother exclaimed. "My daughters are among the finest beauties in the realm. I'm certain His Majesty will be pleased." "Indeed, Lady Ashford," the messenger replied. "We've heard tales of your daughter's exceptional beauty. How many do you have?" A pause. Mira held her breath. "2, her mother said smoothly. "My eldest, Celeste, and my youngest, Aurora. Both blessed with their father's golden hair and my own features." The needle trembled in Mira's fingers. 2 daughters, not 3. Never 3. "Mama," came Aurora's sweet voice, barely above a whisper. "What about—" "Hush!" their mother cut her off sharply. "The messengers don't need to hear every detail of our household." Mira closed her eyes. 16 years of this. 16 years of being the daughter who didn't exist in public, the one hidden away during visits, the one whose name was never spoken when guests inquired about the family. All because she had the misfortune of being born with a face that was simply ordinary. Brown hair that wasn't lustrous, eyes that weren't striking, features that were neither delicate nor memorable. In a world where beauty was currency, she was bankrupt. That evening, Mira sat in her small room in the East Wing, far from the family quarters, and listened to her sister's excited preparations echoing through the halls. Seamstresses had been summoned. Jewellers had arrived with cases of gems. Her mother was coordinating wardrobes that would make her daughters shine like stars. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, knowing it would be Aurora. Her youngest sister slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. At 15, Aurora was everything Mira was not, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with a face that made grown men stumble over their words. But unlike Celeste, who wore her beauty like armour, Aurora had always been kind. "I'm sorry about today," Aurora said, sitting on the edge of Mira's bed. "I tried to mention you, but Mother—" "I know," Mira interrupted gently. "It's not your fault." "You should come with us," Aurora insisted, her eyes bright with conviction. "You're our sister. You have every right to attend." Mira set down her book. "Aurora, can you honestly imagine what would happen if I showed up? Mother would be humiliated, Celeste would be furious, and the king—" She trailed off, laughing bitterly. "The king would look right through me, just like everyone else does." "You don't know that," Aurora protested, but her voice lacked conviction. They both knew the truth. "Go," Mira said softly. "Your seamstress is probably waiting. Wear the sapphire silk. It brings out your eyes." After Aurora left, Mira returned to her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the palace across the kingdom, King Cassian was preparing to meet his future bride. He would have his pick of the most beautiful women in the realm. What was one more invisible girl to him? The week passed in a flurry of preparation. Mira helped her sisters, as she always did, offering suggestions on jewellery, fixing loose threads, arranging their hair. She was good at it, making other people beautiful. It was almost funny in a tragic sort of way. The night before the presentation, her father summoned her to his study. Lord Ashford was a tall man with silver threading through his dark hair. He'd always been distant with Mira, as though he couldn't quite figure out what to do with a daughter who wouldn't increase the family's standing through an advantageous marriage. "Mira," he began, not quite meeting her eyes, "I've been thinking about your future." Her heart sank. Nothing good ever came from these conversations. "I've arranged for you to go to your aunt's estate in the north," he continued. "After your sisters are settled, of course. She needs a companion, and well, you'll have a place there, a purpose. A companion, a glorified servant for an elderly relative, tucked away even further from the world, from any possibility of a life of her own." "I understand, Father," she said, her voice flat. He looked relieved that she wasn't arguing. "It's for the best, you know. You'll be comfortable there, and your aunt is kind. You'll want for nothing, except a family that claimed her, except to be seen, except to matter." "Thank you, Father," she managed, and fled before he could see her tears. Chapter 2. The morning of the presentation dawned clear and bright. The entire household was in chaos, as Celeste and Aurora prepared for the journey to the palace. Mira helped, as always, invisible hands fixing Aurora's necklace, adjusting Celeste's train, fetching forgotten gloves. "You look beautiful," she told Aurora honestly, watching her sister transform into a vision of gold and blue silk. "I wish you could come," Aurora whispered, squeezing her hand. The carriages departed in a cloud of dust and high expectations. Mira watched from her window until they disappeared from view, then returned to her embroidery. The house felt emptier than usual, all the servants having accompanied the family to witness the historic event. She was alone. Hours passed. Mira tried to read, but the words blurred together. She tried to embroider, but her hands were restless. Finally, as the sun began to set, she did something she'd never done before. She went to Celeste's room and opened her wardrobe. Dresses in every colour imaginable hung there, more than one person could wear in a lifetime. Mira's fingers traced the fabrics: silk, velvet, brocade. She pulled out a simple gown in deep emerald green, plainer than Celeste's usual fare, probably why it had been left behind. Before she could second-guess herself, Mira slipped it on. It fit reasonably well, if a bit loose in the bodice. She stood before the mirror and barely recognised herself. The colour brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and the cut made her look taller, more elegant. For just a moment she let herself pretend she was beautiful, pretend she was wanted, pretend she was going to the palace like her sisters. The sound of hoofbeats shattered her fantasy. Mira's heart lurched. They couldn't be back already. Something must have gone wrong. She rushed to the window and froze. At least 50 royal guards filled the courtyard, their armour gleaming in the torchlight. And at their centre, mounted on a massive black stallion, sat a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. King Cassian. Mira stumbled back from the window, mind racing. Why was the king here? Had something happened to her family? Was there some emergency? A thunderous knock echoed through the house. With trembling hands, Mira descended the stairs. There was no one else to answer the door. She was alone, wearing her sister's dress, about to face the most powerful man in the world. She opened the door. Up close, King Cassian was even more magnificent than the songs claimed, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair that fell to his collar and eyes the colour of storm clouds. His face was all sharp angles and classical beauty, the kind that seemed carved by divine hands. He wore black and silver, simple but unmistakably regal. Those storm-grey eyes swept over her once, dismissively, then moved past her as if she were part of the furniture. "Where is Lord Ashford?" His voice was deep, commanding, with an edge that suggested he wasn't accustomed to waiting. He's at the palace, Your Majesty," Mira stammered, dropping into a curtsy. "For the presentation." The king's jaw tightened. "Then who are you?" The question hung in the air. Who was she? The invisible daughter, the shameful secret, the one who didn't count. "I'm Mira," she said quietly. "Lord Ashford's. I'm his daughter." Something flickered in those grey eyes. His daughter, the one he didn't bring to the presentation. It wasn't a question. Mira felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course he'd noticed the absence. He'd probably counted how many daughters each family had presented. "I wasn't well, Your Majesty," she lied, the words tasting like ash. "No," he said flatly. "You're lying." Mira's eyes snapped up to his, shocked by the bluntness. The king stepped closer and she instinctively backed away. He was so tall she had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. "Let me guess," he said, his voice cold. "You're not beautiful enough for them to parade before me. They left you behind because they were ashamed." The words were brutal, made worse by their accuracy. Mira felt something crack inside her chest. "Yes," she whispered, because what was the point of lying now? For a long moment the king simply studied her. His expression was unreadable, those grey eyes seeing far too much. Mira wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to be anywhere but under that penetrating stare. "Pack your things," he said abruptly. "You're coming with me." Mira blinked. What?" "I've spent the entire day being presented with the most beautiful women in my kingdom," the king continued, his tone suggesting this was somehow distasteful. "Not one of them looked at me like I was a person. They saw a crown, a throne, a prize to be won. Do you know how exhausting that is?" Mira shook her head, unable to form words. "Your sisters were among them," he continued. "The golden-haired one couldn't stop giggling. The dark-haired one looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Neither asked me a single question. Neither seemed to care who I actually was. He paused. And then I discovered their family had a third daughter, one they didn't even bother to bring. I thought, now that's interesting. Your Majesty, I don't understand. I'm choosing you, he interrupted. You'll be my queen. The world tilted. Mira gripped the doorframe for support. You can't be serious. I assure you I'm quite serious. He gestured to his guards. Pack her belongings. We leave within the hour. But you haven't even seen the other families, Mira protested. There are dozens more presentations. I've seen enough. The king's voice was final. I want someone real. Someone who hasn't spent their entire life learning to be ornamental. Someone who understands what it's like to be judged on something beyond their control. His eyes met hers. I want you. Chapter 3. The ride to the palace passed in a blur. Mira sat in the royal carriage, still wearing Celeste's green dress, her few possessions hastily packed by efficient guards. King Cassian rode ahead on his stallion, surrounded by his personal guard, leaving her alone with her spiralling thoughts. This had to be some kind of mistake, or a joke, or a nightmare she'd wake from at any moment. But when the palace gates swung open and she saw the massive structure of white stone and gold before her, reality crashed down. This was happening. The king had chosen her. Her, the invisible daughter, the one her own family couldn't bear to acknowledge. Why? She was ushered into a suite of rooms so grand they could have fit her entire house inside them. Servants appeared immediately, drawing a bath, laying out clothes, offering food. They moved around her like she was made of glass, addressing her as "My Lady" and "Your Grace" with perfect deference. It was terrifying. "His Majesty will receive you for dinner," a stern-faced woman announced. She introduced herself as Lady Helena, the palace steward. "You'll need to be prepared. I'll send the seamstresses immediately." "Wait," Mira said, finding her voice. "I need to speak with my family. They don't know where I am." "They've been informed," Lady Helena cut her off crisply. "Lord Ashford and his party have returned home. The king has sent word of his decision." Mira's stomach dropped. She could only imagine her mother's reaction. The fury, the humiliation, the absolute bewilderment that the king had chosen her over Celeste and Aurora. For the first time in her life, she'd been seen, and somehow that was more frightening than remaining invisible. The seamstresses transformed her. They dressed her in a gown of midnight blue that fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They arranged her hair, applied subtle cosmetics, draped her in jewellery that probably cost more than her family's entire estate. When Mira looked in the mirror, she barely recognised herself. She still wasn't beautiful, not like her sisters, but she looked different, almost regal. "His Majesty is waiting," Lady Helena announced. Mira was led through a maze of corridors to a private dining room, not the grand hall she'd expected, but an intimate space with a single table set for two. Candles flickered, casting warm light over rich tapestries and polished wood. King Cassian stood at the window, still dressed in black, his posture rigid. When he turned at her entrance, something flickered in his expression, too quickly for her to identify. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. Mira sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Servants appeared with dish after dish, roasted pheasant, fresh bread, exotic fruits, wine that sparkled in crystal glasses. It was more food than she'd seen at a single meal in her entire life. The king ate in silence. Mira picked at her food, too nervous to truly taste anything. "You're quiet," he observed finally. "I'm trying to understand why I'm here," Mira replied, surprised by her own boldness. "I told you why." "You told me what you don't want," she corrected. "Women who see you as a prize. But that doesn't explain why you choose someone like me." "Someone like you," the king repeated, his tone unreadable. "You mean someone ordinary?" The word stung, even though it was true. "Yes." "Do you know what it's like?" he asked, setting down his fork. "To be worshipped for something you had no hand in creating? I was born beautiful. I was born into royalty. None of it was my doing, yet people treat me like a god. They write songs about my face. They bow and scrape and tell me what they think I want to hear." His grey eyes locked on hers. "Not one person in that presentation hall today looked at me and saw Cassian. They saw King Cassian, the crown, the legend, the conquest." Mira understood more than he knew. She'd spent her life being judged on her appearance too, just from the opposite direction. "And you think I'll be different?" she asked. "Because I'm ordinary?" "I think you'll be real," he corrected. "I think you know what it's like to be judged unfairly. I think you won't spend every moment performing for me." "You don't know me at all," Mira pointed out. "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to. That's more than I can say for anyone else I met today." The strange thing was, he sounded sincere. Mira studied his face, looking for deception, for mockery. She found only exhaustion and something that might have been loneliness. "I'm not what anyone expects in a queen," she said quietly. "I'm not beautiful. I'm not charming. I've spent my entire life being overlooked and underestimated. I have no idea how to navigate court politics or—" "Good," the king interrupted. "Then you won't be corrupted by them." "Your court will eat me alive," Mira continued. "They'll wonder why you chose me. They'll look for weaknesses. They'll—" "Let them talk." His voice was steel. "You're my choice. That's all that matters." "Why?" The question burst from her. "Why does it matter so much to you? You could have any woman in the kingdom. Why risk everything for someone like me?" For a long moment, King Cassian was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. "Because I'm tired of being alone in a room full of people," he said. "Because I want someone who'll argue with me instead of agreeing with everything I say. Because when you opened that door today, you looked at me like I was a person, not a king. And I haven't felt that in longer than I can remember." Something shifted in Mira's chest. She'd spent so long being invisible that she'd never considered the king might feel the same way, despite being the most visible person in the kingdom. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he replied, and the honesty in those words made her believe him. They talked late into the night, not about kingdoms or politics, but about books, about childhoods, about what it felt like to be trapped by expectations. The king, Cassian, she reminded herself, was nothing like she'd imagined. He was sharp and thoughtful, with a dry wit that made her laugh despite her anxiety. When she finally returned to her rooms, exhausted but somehow less afraid, Lady Helena was waiting. "The formal announcement will be made tomorrow," she said. "The wedding will take place in 1 month. You'll need to begin lessons immediately on court protocol, royal responsibilities, and—" "1 month," Mira interrupted. "But I've barely known him for a day." Lady Helena's stern expression softened slightly. "His Majesty has never been one for lengthy courtships. When he makes a decision, He acts on it. That night, alone in her magnificent rooms, Mira stood at the window and looked out at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there was her family, probably still reeling from the news. Her mother would be furious, Celeste would be devastated, and Aurora would be worried about her. For 16 years Mira had been invisible. Now, suddenly she was the most visible person in the kingdom, the king's chosen bride, the future queen. She touched her reflection in the dark window glass. The same unremarkable face looked back at her. Nothing had changed about her appearance, but somehow everything had changed. The question was, could she survive being seen? Chapter 4. The next morning, Mira woke to find her room filled with people, seamstresses, jewellers, hairdressers, and a woman who introduced herself as her etiquette instructor, all descended upon her at once. "We have 1 month to prepare you," the etiquette instructor, Lady Prudence, announced. She was a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. 1 month to transform you from a country mouse into a queen. It's barely enough time. Mira bit back a retort. She was too overwhelmed to argue. The days that followed blurred together in an exhausting parade of lessons: how to walk, how to sit, how to hold a teacup, which fork to use, how to address various ranks of nobility, the proper curtsy depth for different occasions, the history of every royal house in the kingdom, the complex web of alliances and feuds that made up court politics. "Your posture is atrocious," Lady Prudence would snap. "A queen does not slouch. Your voice is too quiet. Project authority. No, no, no. That's the wrong greeting for a duchess. Start again." By the end of each day, Mira's head pounded and her body ached from maintaining perfect posture for hours. But the worst part was the constant reminder that she wasn't enough, would never be enough, no matter how hard she tried. The only respite came in the evenings when she dined with Cassian. He dismissed the formal dinners in the grand hall, insisting they eat privately. Those were the only hours when Mira felt like she could breathe. "How are your lessons progressing?" he asked one evening, 3 days into her transformation. "They're horrible," Mira admitted, too tired to be diplomatic. "Lady Prudence informed me today that I have the grace of a wounded ox." Cassian's lips twitched. "She said that? Her exact words?" Mira pushed food around her plate. "She's not wrong, though. I don't belong here. I don't know how to be what everyone expects." "What do they expect?" Cassian asked. "Someone like my sisters," Mira said quietly. "Beautiful, graceful, charming, someone who looks like a queen." Cassian set down his fork. "Come with me." He led her through the palace to a long gallery lined with portraits. Kings and queens throughout history stared down at them from gilded frames. "Look at them," Cassian said, gesturing to the paintings. "Every one of them chosen for their beauty, their bloodlines, their political value. Do you know what they all have in common?" Mira studied the faces. Perfect features, regal bearing, expensive clothes. "They look like they belong here." "They look miserable," Cassian corrected. "Look closer. Behind the perfect poses and serene expressions. Most of these people were trapped in roles they never wanted, in marriages arranged for convenience rather than compatibility. They spent their lives being ornamental, never being real." He stopped in front of a portrait of a stunning woman in crimson and gold. "My mother," he said, "the most beautiful queen in 3 generations. She hated every moment of her life here. She died when I was 12, and I'm convinced it was because she couldn't bear being trapped in her own perfect life any longer." Mira's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. My point," Cassian continued, "is that I didn't choose you because I want you to be like them. I chose you because you're different, because you're real. So stop trying to transform into something you're not." "But Lady Prudence works for me," Cassian interrupted, "and I'll have a word with her about her teaching methods." The next day, Lady Prudence's approach shifted dramatically. She was still demanding, but the cruel comments stopped. Instead, she began to explain not just what Mira should do, but why certain protocols existed. "You'll never be a traditional queen," Lady Prudence said during a lesson on court precedents, "but perhaps that's not what this kingdom needs." It was the closest thing to a compliment Mira had received from her. As the weeks passed, Mira slowly began to find her footing. She learned to navigate the palace's complex social landscape, to identify allies and threats, to read the subtle power plays that happened in every conversation. More importantly, she learned that being different didn't mean being wrong. Her evenings with Cassian became the highlight of her days. They talked about everything: books, philosophy, the state of the kingdom, their fears and hopes. He showed her parts of the palace no one else saw: the old library filled with ancient texts, the hidden garden where he went to think, the tower where he could look out over the city and remember why he carried the weight of the crown. "I've never shown these places to anyone," he admitted one evening, as they stood in the garden under a canopy of stars. "Why show me?" Mira asked. "Because you see them," he said simply. "Most people look at the palace and see gold and grandeur. You look at it and see the weight of history, the burden of expectations. You understand." Something had shifted between them over the past weeks. The formal politeness had given way to genuine friendship. Mira found herself looking forward to their time together, found herself noticing small details about him. The way he rubbed his temple when he was stressed, how he'd touch his mother's portrait for luck when passing it, the rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually severe expression. And she'd caught him watching her too, his grey eyes thoughtful, expression unguarded in a way it never was in public. 3 days before the wedding, her family arrived at the palace. Mira stood in a receiving room, her hands clasped tightly together, as her parents and sisters were announced. She hadn't seen them since the night Cassian had taken her away. Part of her had hoped they'd be happy for her. The rational part knew better. Her mother entered first, resplendent in purple silk, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotions. Her father followed, looking uncomfortable. Celeste came next, her beautiful face tight with barely suppressed fury. And finally Aurora, whose eyes were red as if she'd been crying. "Mira," her mother said, her voice cool as ice. "How unexpected this all is. Mother, father," Mira curtsied perfectly, just as Lady Prudence had taught her. "Celeste, Aurora, thank you for coming." "As if we had a choice," Celeste muttered. "Celeste," their father warned. An uncomfortable silence fell. Mira had imagined this reunion countless times, had practiced what she might say. Now, faced with her family's barely concealed resentment, the words died in her throat. "His Majesty has been very generous," her mother said, her tone suggesting this was somehow an accusation. "Inviting us to stay in the palace, providing new wardrobes, granting your father a position on the royal council." "He wanted you to be comfortable," Mira replied. "Comfortable," Celeste repeated with a bitter laugh, "while you steal what should have been mine." "I didn't steal anything. You think we don't know what you did, Celeste hissed, stepping closer. Wearing my dress, answering the door, throwing yourself at him when we weren't there to... That's enough. Cassian's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. You will not speak to your queen that way. Everyone froze. Celeste paled, dropping into a hasty curtsy. Even Mira's mother looked shaken. Your Majesty, her father began, please forgive. There's nothing to forgive, Cassian interrupted, his grey eyes cold as stone. As long as we're all clear on where we stand, Mira is to be my wife, your queen, and you will treat her with the respect her position demands. He crossed to Mira's side, his presence a shield. Now, I believe you were just leaving. The servants will show you to your rooms. After they left, Mira sagged against a chair. That was long overdue, Cassian finished. His expression softened as he looked at her. Are you all right? I don't know, Mira admitted. I thought maybe, after everything, they might see me differently. But I'm still just an embarrassment to them. Cassian took her hand, the gesture surprising in its gentleness. Then they're fools who don't deserve you. Mira looked up at him, at this man who had turned her entire world upside down, who had seen her when no one else would, who defended her against her own family. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Always. And Mira realised with startling clarity that sometime over the past month she'd stopped being afraid. Somewhere between the etiquette lessons and the late-night conversations, between the palace gardens and the star-filled evenings, she'd fallen in love with him. The question was, did he feel the same? Chapter 5. The morning of the wedding dawned with clear skies and warm sun. Mira woke to find her room filled with attendants ready to prepare her for the most important day of her life. The dress was magnificent, white silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light with every movement. A crown of delicate silver leaves would rest on her head, marking her transformation from invisible daughter to queen. As the attendants worked, Mira stared at her reflection and barely recognised herself. You look beautiful, Aurora said softly. She'd slipped into the room while the attendants were busy. Mira turned to find her sister standing by the door, her expression troubled. Aurora, Mira said, and suddenly the attendants were ushering everyone else out to give them privacy. I'm sorry, Aurora said as soon as they were alone, for how Mother and Celeste treated you yesterday, for how we've always treated you. It's not your fault. It is, Aurora interrupted. I let them make you invisible. I never stood up for you, never insisted you be included. I told myself I was being kind by visiting you, by talking to you, but really I was just making myself feel better while doing nothing to change things. Mira's eyes stung with unexpected tears. You were always kind to me. That mattered. But it wasn't enough. Aurora crossed the room and took Mira's hands. You deserve so much more than kind. You deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. And I'm so glad you found someone who does all of that. I don't know if he loves me, Mira admitted quietly. Aurora smiled. Then you haven't seen the way he looks at you. Before Mira could ask what she meant, Lady Helena appeared to announce it was time. The ceremony was held in the palace's grand cathedral, witnessed by thousands. As Mira walked down the aisle, she felt the weight of every eye upon her. The nobles whispered behind their fans, probably wondering what the king saw in her. The commoners who'd been allowed to attend looked confused by his choice. But then Mira reached the altar and saw Cassian, and everyone else disappeared. He wore ceremonial armour of silver and white, his dark hair carefully styled, his handsome face solemn as he watched her approach. But when their eyes met, she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not duty, not resignation, warmth, wonder, something that looked almost like hope. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and blessings. When Cassian slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand was steady. When she did the same, hers trembled. "You may kiss your bride," the Archbishop announced. Cassian stepped closer, one hand cupping her cheek. His grey eyes searched hers for a moment, asking a silent question. Mira answered by rising on her toes. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a promise rather than a claim. When they parted, Cassian's expression had transformed into something Mira had never seen before, pure, unguarded joy. The celebration that followed was magnificent. The great hall had been transformed into a wonderland of flowers and lights. Musicians played, dancers performed, and nobles from across the kingdom offered congratulations and gifts. Mira moved through it all in a daze, Cassian at her side, his hand warm in hers. Nobles bowed, some with genuine respect, others with barely concealed scepticism. She handled each with the grace Lady Prudence had drilled into her. Her family approached during the feast. Her mother offered a stiff curtsy. "Your Majesty," not Mira, not daughter, just the title. "Thank you for attending," Mira replied, her voice steady. Celeste looked like she'd swallowed glass as she curtsied. Aurora's curtsy was genuine, her smile warm. After they left, Cassian leaned close. "Well handled." "I learned from the best," Mira replied. As the evening wore on, Cassian led her onto the dance floor. Mira had learned the steps during her lessons, but she'd never been good at dancing. She stumbled slightly and Cassian steadied her. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I'm terrible at this." "I don't care," he said, pulling her closer. "Dance with me anyway." They moved together, not with the perfect grace of trained dancers, but with something better. Comfort, ease, the natural rhythm of two people who understood each other. "I have something to confess," Cassian said quietly, his lips near her ear. Mira's heart skipped. "What is it?" "That night I came to your house," he began, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the music. "I wasn't looking for a bride. I was running away." She pulled back slightly to see his face. "What do you mean?" "I'd spent the entire day being presented with perfection," he continued. "Beautiful women who looked at me like I was a prize to be won. And I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend my life with someone who only saw the crown." His grey eyes met hers. "So I left. I got on my horse and just rode, trying to clear my head. When I found myself at your family's estate, I told myself I was checking to see why they'd only brought 2 daughters. But really, I think I was looking for an excuse not to go back." "And then you found me," Mira whispered. "And then I found you," he agreed, "in a borrowed dress with terror in your eyes, being completely honest about how your family treated you. You didn't try to impress me. You didn't perform. You were just real." His hand tightened on hers. "I knew in that moment that I wanted to know you. Not as a king looking for a queen, but as a man who'd finally found someone he could talk to." "Cassian," Mira breathed. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since that first night, and I know this marriage started as a way to escape expectations, but it's become so much more, at least for me." Tears pricked Mira's eyes. "For me too," she whispered. "I love you, not the king, not the crown, you." The smile that broke across his face was radiant. He spun her around, and for once Mira didn't care that she stumbled. She was too busy laughing, too busy feeling lighter than air, too busy being seen and loved and chosen. Later, when the celebration finally wound down and they retreated to the royal chambers they would now share, Cassian pulled her close. "I have one more confession," he said. "Another one," Mira teased. "I asked your sister Aurora what you liked. She told me you loved books and gardens and stargazing." He led her to the windows and pulled back the heavy curtains. The view took Mira's breath away. Beyond their chambers was a private terrace she hadn't noticed before, filled with flowering plants and comfortable chairs. A telescope stood at one end, pointed at the star-filled sky. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours," Cassian replied. "Our private space, away from the court and the expectations and everyone else. Just for us." Mira turned to face him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "How did you know this was exactly what I needed?" "Because it's what I needed too," he said simply. "A place to be ourselves." They stood together under the stars, Mira tucked against Cassian's side, and she thought about how far she'd come. From the invisible daughter in the corner to a queen standing in her own garden, loved by a man who saw her not despite her ordinariness, but because of it. "What are you thinking?" Cassian asked. "That I spent my whole life wishing to be seen," Mira said softly. "And now I realize being seen isn't enough. I wanted to be known, to be chosen, to matter to someone." "You matter to me," Cassian said fiercely. "You matter to this kingdom, whether they know it yet or not. And one day they'll see what I see, a queen who understands what it means to be overlooked, who will fight for those who have no voice, who will never forget where she came from." Mira stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into that single gesture. When they parted, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For opening that door," he said. "For being brave enough to be honest, for being you." And Mira realized that sometimes the greatest fairy tales aren't about transforming into something else. Sometimes they're about being seen exactly as you are and being loved anyway. Or perhaps being loved because of it. Epilogue. 1 year later, Queen Mira stood in the throne room addressing a gathering of nobles and commoners alike. She'd called this assembly herself, using the authority Cassian had insisted she wield. "For too long," she said, her voice carrying through the hall with the confidence she'd earned through practice and determination. "We've judged people on their appearance rather than their character. We've assigned worth based on beauty instead of substance. As your queen, I'm establishing new laws to ensure that every person in this kingdom, regardless of how they look, has equal opportunity for education, employment, and advancement." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others sceptical. "I know many of you wonder why your king chose me," Mira continued. "I've heard the whispers, I've seen the confused looks. I'm not what you expected in a queen. But that's exactly why I'm standing here today, because I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be overlooked, to be told you don't matter because you don't meet someone else's standards of worth." She felt Cassian's presence beside her before she saw him. He'd stepped up to join her on the dais, his hand finding hers. "My wife," he said, addressing the crowd, "is the finest queen this kingdom has ever known. Not because she's perfect, but because she's real. She understands the struggles of our people, because she's lived them. She will fight for justice because she's experienced injustice. And she will rule with wisdom because she's learned that true strength comes from embracing who you are, not pretending to be something else." The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. Not everyone was convinced. Change never came easily, but it was a start. That evening, Mira and Cassian retreated to their private garden. She'd filled it with flowers over the past year, had spent countless hours here, reading and writing and simply being. It had become her sanctuary, their sanctuary. "You were magnificent today," Cassian said, pulling her into his arms. "I was terrified," Mira admitted. "I know, that's what made it magnificent." He kissed her forehead. "Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right anyway." Mira thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, hiding in the shadows, convinced she had no value. That girl wouldn't recognize the woman she'd become. Not because she'd transformed into something different, but because she'd finally stepped into who she'd always been. "I got a letter from Aurora today," she said. "She's been visiting the academies we funded, talking to girls who've been told they're not good enough. She says you were right, change is starting." "We were right," Cassian corrected. "This was your vision." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, the city sparkled with lights. Their city now, their kingdom, their responsibility and their joy. "Do you ever regret it?" Mira asked quietly. "Choosing me?" Cassian pulled back to look at her, his grey eyes intense. "Every day I wake up grateful that I ran away from that presentation. Grateful that I ended up at your door. Grateful that you were brave enough to be yourself, even when the world told you that wasn't enough." He cupped her face in his hands. "You're not just my queen, Mira. You're my best friend, my partner, the person who sees me, really sees me and loves me anyway. How could I ever regret that?" Tears pricked Mira's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," he replied. "Every ordinary, extraordinary inch of you." Under the stars in their private garden, Queen Mira kissed her king and thought about how wrong the fairy tales had been. True love didn't transform you into someone else. It didn't make you beautiful or perfect or anything other than what you already were. True love simply saw you, really saw you, and chose you anyway. And that, Mira had learned, was the most magical thing of all.